The day I became a rule breaker in my own neighborhood was the same day I realized how far an HOA will go to crush even the smallest acts of kindness. You see, I never imagined that giving away free water could turn me into a target. Free water. Something so basic, so necessary, so undeniably good. But that was the beginning of what my neighbors now call the free water incident. It started with a simple idea. Nothing fancy. Just a blue plastic cooler filled with ice and bottled water, placed at the corner of my driveway where delivery drivers often stopped. In my mind, it wasn't a statement. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even special. It was just common sense. Every day, I watched men and women hauling packages under the scorching sun, sometimes struggling to catch their breath, sweat pouring down their faces. All I could think was, they need water. Why shouldn't I help? I never guessed that my little cooler would spark one of the ugliest battles this neighborhood had ever seen. A battle of kindness versus control. And here's the shocking part. I didn't lose. If you're watching this, maybe you've had your own run-ins with an HOA. Maybe you've been fined for leaving your trash can out for a few extra hours. Or maybe someone sent you a letter about your grass being a half-inch too tall. But what happened to me wasn't about grass or paint colors or fences. It was about humanity. Stick with me, because the story has everything. A good deed punished, petty power games, neighbors taking sides, and eventually a showdown that brought an entire community together. By the time I finished this fight, things in my neighborhood would never be the same again. So grab a drink, maybe even a bottle of water, and let me tell you how something as small as a cooler turned me into the most talked about man on my street. To understand how this all started, you need to know a little about me. My name is Michael. I've lived in this neighborhood for 6 years, long enough to know how things usually work around here. It's a nice place, quiet, with manicured lawns and families who wave politely as they drive by. Nothing extraordinary, nothing flashy, just your typical suburban community run, of course, by a homeowners association. Now, I've never been the kind of guy who stirs up trouble. I keep my lawn trimmed, I pay my dues, and I don't decorate my house with neon Christmas lights or inflatable skeletons. In other words, I blend in. But one thing has always bothered me about this neighborhood: the HOA's obsession with appearances. They love things neat, tidy, uniform, controlled. And sometimes that obsession means they forget that real people live here. Last summer, during one of the hottest weeks on record, I was working from home when I noticed an Amazon driver trudging up my driveway. He was young, maybe early 20s, carrying a heavy package on his shoulder. His face was flushed, sweat dripping from his chin, and when he set the box down, I saw him pause for a moment to catch his breath. It hit me then. These drivers are out in this heat all day with barely a break. A few days later, I saw a UPS driver. Same story. He climbed into his truck, turned the key, and just sat there with his head resting on the wheel. I could almost feel the exhaustion radiating from him. That's when the idea struck me. Why not set out some water? I had an old cooler in the garage, the kind you take to a picnic, and a bag of ice in the freezer. I filled the cooler, loaded it with bottled water, and placed it at the end of my driveway with a little sign that said, "Free water for delivery drivers. Stay cool." The first reaction, I got nearly melted my heart. A FedEx driver spotted the cooler, read the sign, and immediately smiled. He pulled out a bottle, raised in a little salute, and said, "You don't know how much this helps." That moment alone made it worth it. Over the next week, I refilled the cooler daily. Drivers stopped by, grabbed bottles, sometimes even left thank you notes under the lid. My daughter, who's 10, loved helping me refill it. She'd say, "Dad, we're like superheroes for the drivers." It became our little family project. Something small, something good. I didn't think about how it looked. I didn't think about rules. I didn't think about the HOA. Why would I? It was just a cooler. What I didn't know was that my good deed was about to collide head-on with the one force in this neighborhood that could find fault in anything. The HOA. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an envelope taped to my front door. At first, I thought it was junk mail. But then I saw the letterhead. Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. My stomach sank. The letter was brief, cold, and to the point. This is a formal notice of violation. Unsightly clutter has been observed on your property in the form of a plastic cooler. You are hereby fined $100 and must remove the violation within 7 days to avoid additional penalties. I read it twice, then a third time, convinced I had to be misunderstanding. A cooler? Unsightly clutter? They made it sound like I'd left a pile of rotting garbage on my lawn. When my wife came home, I showed her the letter. She laughed at first, thinking it had to be a mistake. But there was no mistake. The HOA had decided that my little act of kindness was against the rules. I decided to call the HOA office the next morning. The woman who answered was polite, in that fake, corporate way. I explained what the cooler was for, thinking once they heard the reasoning, they'd back off. But she cut me off before I finished. Sir, the issue isn't what it's for. The issue is that it's clutter, and clutter is prohibited. The cooler must be removed. I asked to speak to the HOA president, a woman named Linda Porter. Linda had a reputation in the neighborhood. People called her the rule book queen. She was the type who walked around with a measuring stick to make sure grass didn't grow more than 3 inches high. When Linda finally called me back, her voice was sharp, like she was already annoyed. Mr. Harris, I understand you received a violation notice. Let me be clear. The HOA exists to maintain property values. When one homeowner allows clutter, it affects everyone. We cannot make exceptions. I told her it wasn't clutter. It was water. For delivery drivers. For people. For human beings. There was a pause. Then she said something that still makes me angry to this day. Mr. Harris, we sympathize with your sentiment, but good intentions don't excuse breaking the rules. And that was it. No compromise. No discussion. Just a $100 fine for giving water to thirsty workers. I thought about paying the fine just to make it go away, but something inside me snapped. I refused to remove the cooler. Instead, I bought a second one. One stayed on the driveway for drivers. The other I put on the side of the house for anyone walking by. If the HOA thought they could bully me, they were about to learn otherwise. That's when the harassment began. Within days, I got another letter. This time the fine doubled. $200. The letter accused me of willful noncompliance and warned of possible legal action. Neighbors started whispering. Some told me privately they admired what I was doing, but they didn't dare say so publicly. Others sided with the HOA, muttering about how rules are rules and how I was making the neighborhood look bad. The worst part was how relentless the HOA became. Every week, a new violation notice appeared. One said my trash can was visible from the street. Another said my lawn ornaments were excessive. I only had 2 garden gnomes. Then they fined me for leaving my car parked on the street overnight, something half the neighborhood did. It was obvious. They were targeting me. The more they pushed, the more stubborn I became. I kept restocking the cooler. On the hottest days, I even added sports drinks and snacks. Delivery drivers began telling me other neighborhoods had nothing like this, that mine was the only stop where they felt truly cared for. That only fueled me more. Then came the breaking point. A heat wave rolled in, breaking records across the state. One afternoon, I found a delivery driver collapsed on the curb by my mailbox. He was pale, sweating heavily, barely able to stand. I rushed over, grabbed 2 bottles of water from the cooler, and helped him sit in the shade until he recovered. He told me he hadn't had a drink in hours. That moment burned into me. My cooler wasn't clutter. It wasn't an eyesore. It was necessary, but the HOA didn't care. A week later, I received a letter threatening to put a lien on my house if I didn't comply. That's when I realized this wasn't just about water anymore. This was about control. I knew I couldn't keep fighting blindly. If the HOA wanted to play legal games, I needed to understand the rules. So I started reading the HOA bylaws line by line. Hours turned into days as I pored over every clause, every regulation. And you know what I found? Hypocrisy. The bylaws allowed temporary decorative items on properties. People put out Halloween pumpkins, Christmas inflatables, even lawn sale signs. All of those were fine, but somehow a cooler with water wasn't. I began documenting everything. every violation notice, every photo of other homes with decorations or clutter that went unpunished, every thank you note from drivers. I built a binder of evidence. Then I started talking to neighbors. Quietly at first. I learned I wasn't the only one the HOA had bullied. One neighbor was fined for leaving a wheelchair ramp too long after his mother visited. Another was cited for having holiday lights up past the season. It was a pattern of petty control. Slowly, a small alliance formed. A retired lawyer down the street offered to help me review the bylaws. Another neighbor who worked in local government gave me advice on filing complaints. What started as my personal fight was becoming a community movement. We met secretly in backyards and garages, swapping stories and strategies. The more I listened, the clearer it became. People weren't just angry at me for keeping the cooler. They were angry at years of being pushed around. The HOA escalated again with a final threat. Remove the cooler or face a lawsuit. That same week, the heat wave worsened. The temperature soared past 105 degrees. That's when it happened. A delivery driver collapsed near the entrance of our subdivision. Paramedics rushed in, neighbors gathered, and people began asking out loud, "Why are we fighting someone who's giving out water during this heat?" The story spread quickly. A neighbor posted about it on the community Facebook page. Then another shared it on a local news group. Within days, the headline appeared, "Homeowner fined for giving free water to delivery drivers." And just like that, my quiet fight became a public scandal. Local reporters showed up. Cameras rolled as they interviewed me by the cooler. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told them, this isn't about clutter. This is about people. Delivery drivers are human beings, and they deserve water on a hot day. The video went viral. Comments poured in. Thousands of people outraged that an HOA could punish kindness. Neighbors started slipping notes of support in my mailbox. Strangers donated bottled water, ice, even new coolers. The HOA panicked. Linda Porter, the president, released a statement calling me non-compliant and accusing me of seeking attention. But her words only made her look cruel. The more she spoke, the worse it got for them. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Hundreds of residents showed up, more than I'd ever seen before. People who usually stayed silent took the microphone and demanded answers. One elderly man stood up and said, "If giving water is against the rules, then the rules are broken, not the man." I presented my binder of evidence, the bylaws, the photos, the stories. I showed the media coverage, the thank you notes, even a doctor's letter about the dangers of heat stroke. The room erupted in applause. The pressure was too much. The board voted to rescind all my fines and draft a new policy. Kindness stations would be allowed. For the first time, the HOA had lost, and they lost big. Linda Porter resigned within weeks. Her reputation destroyed. I rebuilt my cooler station, this time with a permanent stand and a sign that read, "Community Kindness Station, free water." Drivers still stop every day. Some neighbors even started their own stations. Looking back, I realized this was never just about water. It was about standing up to pettiness, about showing that kindness matters more than appearances. One act of compassion sparked a movement, and for once, the good guys won. So if you ever find yourself bullied for doing the right thing, remember this story. Don't back down. Because sometimes the smallest acts, like handing out a bottle of water, can change an entire community.